So let's come into our seated centering position. Just take some time with it. If cross-legged isn't a supported feeling in your body, you have to find a modified position. You can change your legs however you need to make sure that you feel as anchored as you can in the lower body. And then take some time with your position so that you really feel that you're finding the sitting bones, that you're tapping into the weight of your thigh bones, kind of anchoring into the three-pronged sitting bone, tailbone relationship with the floor. And then finding the torso aligning over that skull above the spine. Taking some time to lift and spread your chest. And then see if you can maintain your shoulder position as you join your hands together in front of your heart. Lowering your gaze away from the brain. And just kind of directing your attention to the parts of you that are meeting the floor, meeting the props. Inviting a deeper settling there. Noticing any tension or gripping in the abdomen. Maybe finding a softer abdomen, welcoming a deeper breath flow. Softening your face, your jaw. And just getting quiet enough to really determine how you're starting your practice this morning on the levels of the physical, emotional, mental, the energy. Maybe inviting an intention into this practice, into your day, into your life. Maintaining a lifted and spread chest on an exhale, bowing toward the heart. Release your hands. As you're ready, lift your head. Let your eyes gently open. Welcome. We're talking about the backbends today and the actions that work in opposition in the body. I thought I'd use this singing bowl as a little visual aid. We know about pelvic tilt and how important that is in back bending and in forward bending. So when we're forward bending, we do a little bit of a forward tilt with the pelvis to encourage more length in the lower back. When we're back bending, we do a posterior tilt of the pelvis so that we can open the chest and open the upper back and take the head back. So we're going to play a lot with pelvic tilt, and I want you to kind of think about this forward tilt of the pelvis as what I'm going to call a pouring, like you're pouring something out, and then this posterior tilt of the pelvis, we're going to call it scooping. So if you hear me say scooping and pouring, that's kind of what you're visualizing in your head. Pouring out the front limb, scooping is that posterior tilt. So we're going to play a lot with back bending and pairing it with forward bending just to feel how the tilt of the pelvis changes with those actions. So we're going to begin on our backs. You can find your way onto your back. We'll just do a little bit of a reclining cat, cow, and bridge sequence. Just start on your back with your knees bent. And you don't have to have your heels walked in super close. You can just bring your heels in line with your knees. Extend your arms, and your palms can be down. And just take a moment to bring the outer upper arms down, the shoulder blades toward the chest. And you're going to just kind of close that gap between your lower back and the floor. So there's your posterior pelvic tilt. That's the scooping action. And then you're going to exaggerate that gap with the pouring action, bringing a large space between you and the floor, arching the back. We're just going to do this a few times here. Exhale And on the inhale, making that space larger. Just kind of rocking on the pelvis. And we'll tie this into a bridge pose in a little bit. So just taking a few more, bringing some mobility to the spine. And the next time you find yourself with that kind of sealed off gap, that posterior tilt, that scooping action, you're going to keep it and press the floor and lift the hips, finding a bridge pose. Holding for one inhale. And then on the exhale, lengthening your spine back to the floor, like you're kind of tractioning the spine, bringing space between the vertebrae, all the way down into the sacrum. And when you get there, neutral spine, and then exaggerating that big space between you and the floor. Big in-breath here. Exhale, you're going to close that space, tip the pelvis back, and then raise the hips. And again, holding for an in-breath. Exhale, lengthening the spine back to the floor. Inhale through a neutral spine into that pouring action. Back to the scooping action. And then keeping that lift the hips one more time. So hold it here in bridge pose. As we tip the pelvis back, feel how it helps the chest lift, helps the shoulders engage down. Try not to overuse the buttocks. So press into your big toes to drive the inner thighs down, keep a certain spreading to the flesh of the buttocks. Keep tipping the pelvis back, which brings the tailbone forward, meaning up in this position. And then slowly walk your spine back down again. Good. I'm going to have you roll onto your right hip. And you can just stack your legs there. So your knees are bent, your legs are stacked. You're on your right hip. Your left hip is pretty much on top of the right hip. And you might just rest your left arm on your side waist, but you're going to try to welcome some weight back to the left shoulder. You're attempting to turn your chest toward the ceiling. You can use your right hand to just hold your legs in place. If the legs kind of want to adjust or slide away, just kind of use the weight of your hand there. You might eventually unfold the left arm to the side and look down the left arm to complete your twist. And let's just stay for 5 breaths. It's a really quick, efficient way to wake up the spine, a deep reclining twist. Use those exhales, try to really follow the exhales to their very end. Every time you deeply exhale, that spine rings out, becomes more supple. And as we know, twists are so important to complement a back bending practice. They just kind of regulate the nervous system. And gently just kind of bring ourselves back onto our back bodies. Take some time once you're there to just rearrange your body so you're evenly placed on the floor before we move to the other side. And then you'll help your knees just kind of stack right above left. You're on your left hip now. You might use that left hand to just hold the legs there and either draping your right hand over your side body or extending that right arm out to the side, looking down the right arm to complete your twist. And again, just 5 breaths. Really truly try to surrender the weight of the legs. If there's effort in the legs, the spine will be a little more limited here. So if you can make your legs more passive, your spine will respond with a deeper twist. And after the next exhalation, let's use your following inhale to help you onto your back. Take a moment to realign yourself there, put everything back in good alignment as symmetrically as you can. And then you can roll back to your side just so that we can find our way to hands and knees. And using our cat-cow action just to really reinforce the scooping, pouring dynamic here. So we're going to exhale, and you're going to tilt the pelvis back, which is that scooping action. You're rounding your spine. And then inhale, you're going to arch your back and pour out the front, remove that pelvic bowl. And just do this a few times and see if you can visualize that pelvic bowl moving inside of you, the pouring, the scooping. Let's do it 2 more times. And then you're going to come back to a neutral pelvic tilt, back to a neutral table position. We're going to kind of carry that forth in downward dog and plank. So this is a pairing of downward dog is a forward bend. And then plank is not necessarily a back bend, but we use the back bending pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt. So you're going to curl your toes under, extend your legs, and find your pouring action with your pelvis. So you're tilting that pelvis really nice and forward, which brings a nice lengthening feeling to your lower back. And notice how that allows you to move your chest toward your thighs, keeps your lumbar nice and long. And now you're going to begin to find the scooping action of the pelvis. Let it move you into plank position. Notice how the tailbone moves into the front body. You're tipping the pelvis back. And I don't know if you noticed this, we'll do it a few times. So take yourself back to down dog. You will kind of self-guide between these two poses. I don't know if you noticed this, but in my body, I definitely notice I have way more range of motion with my pouring action than I do with my scooping action. And that's true for a lot of people. So going to plank and down dog, you're just going to really keep your attention on the pelvic motion. Scooping, pouring. Let's just do one more pairing here. So wherever you are, just come back through those two poses. And then go ahead and place your knees. We'll come into child's pose. And resting the head either on your own hands, on the floor, on your fists. Couple deep breaths, just resting, breathing. We're going to come back through downward dog just so that we can step into a lunging position. So you know that transition is difficult for you. You're going to find any way that you can into a left knee kneeling and a right foot stepping forward. But if you're coming through downward dog, you can come into downward dog now. And then raising your right leg. And then you can go ahead and step through. And again, feel free to transition any way that works in your body if that is not good for you. So we have the left knee kneeling, the right foot stepping forward. We're going to bring the torso up. And you can just take hold of your hips here, squeezing the elbows a little closer together, which broadens the chest, broadens the shoulder girdle. And then again, imagine there's a book on your head. I always say that, but what we don't want to do is tilt the torso at an angle. We want to kind of glide forward. You have to tilt the pelvis back. Think about the scooping action. Sensing into the front left side. Make sure your skull stays above your spine. You're not throwing your head forward. And then go ahead and raise your left arm straight up. You're going to cross the body, left hand finds right outer knee or thigh. And you're going to press your hand against your thigh, your thigh against your hand, and rotate your torso to the right. And then taking that right arm out toward the back end of the mat, fingertips toward the back end of the mat. Turn your gaze and look toward the right hand. Good. So we're going to bring a little bit of a forward bend in now. So taking the right hand back to the hip, you're going to rest your left forearm on your left thigh now. So you're angling the trunk now. You're in a forward bending action. So a little bit more of the pouring action with the pelvis, tipping the front rim toward the floor a little bit, will give you a little more length to work with. Pressurize your left forearm, revolve your trunk to the right, and stay for a few breaths. Wonderful. And you're going to slowly find your way back to downward facing dog. So you'll turn back toward the floor, place your hands, curl your left toes underneath. On an exhale, shoot your right leg back into the Ekapada Adho Mukha Svanasana position. And then stepping your toes down. Pouring action in the pelvis. Revisiting plank with the scooping action to carry you forward. These look good, nice work. And then draw the hips back, the pouring action in the pelvis. And on an in-breath, raise the left leg or transition however you need to, so that we have the left foot stepping forward and the right knee kneeling. Once you're there, you can bring your torso upright, take hold of your hips. Squeeze the elbows a little closer together. Tip the pelvis back and shift your weight forward without leaning forward. Welcoming a really nice opening to the front of the right thigh, the hip flexor. Keeping the skull adjusting back. So the skull and the pelvis oftentimes work in opposition. There's a pelvis, it is tipping back. You can think about kind of the underside of the pelvis moving forward and the head moving back. We can balance these efforts. We bring a lot more grace into the poses. Okay, so go ahead and raise the right arm. Exhale, you're just going to drop your right hand to the left knee or thigh. Pressurize those two points of contact together. Rotate your trunk to the left. And then extend that left arm toward the back end of the mat and let your gaze find your left fingertips. A little bit of a balancing challenge. You're still tilting your pelvis back, moving the tailbone forward. And now just pairing this with a slight forward bend. We're going to prop the right forearm on the left thigh and tip the pelvis forward slightly. Bring your hand back to your hip here. Just keep revolving your chest to the left. Wonderful. And after an exhale, you can inhale yourself back to putting your hands on the floor, preparing for the exit through downward facing dog, curling those right toes under. Go ahead and shoot the left leg back. And then bringing the toes down and taking the knees to the floor, feet together, sit back, and just taking child's pose. So you may or may not have noticed in child's pose, we don't have the dynamic opposition going on. We have a singular curvature from the brainstem to the tailbone. So this is a forward bend and you're not tipping the pelvis forward. Okay, just a few deep breaths. Okay, so we're gonna come back to a lunging position. You'll probably wanna have your blocks. I find them helpful to stabilize, but also to connect me with the floor. It seems a little distant here for these two poses we're gonna do. Again, another complementing kind of pairing of a forward bend and a back bend. So you just have your blocks available at the top of the mat. And we'll start again with the right foot stepping forward, the left knee kneeling. Make sure you're comfortable. So if you need a pad under your knee, feel free to put a blanket there. You can always double your mat up under the knee if you're not available having blankets. We're going to come back to Anjaneyasana, which is the lunge we did before. And you're just going to take your hands to your hips and do your best to send your weight forward without tilting you are tilting the pelvis, without tilting the torso. So keep it vertical, tipping the pelvis back, shoulders in external rotation, and then taking your arms overhead, finding the Urdhva Namaskarasana position, upward prayer. So you're pressing your hands together, doing your best to fully extend your arms, straighten the elbows, take the arms beyond the ears if you can, and take the gaze slightly up. And now we'll transition, tilting the pelvis forward. You're going to use your blocks as arm extenders, and you're going to take one outside the leg and one inside the leg so that you can align yourself, chest directly facing right leg. So you're resting on your right heel, your toes are stacked above it. You're tipping the pelvis forward now to free up space in the low back. Breathing your chest forward, look forward for a couple breaths. And then on an exhale, take the head toward the leg. You can think about your tailbone moving toward the ceiling. So the skull and the pelvis working in opposition here. Couple deep breaths. And we're going to do a few on our own, just kind of self-guided between these two poses. So on an inhale, come back to that lunging position. Take your arms up. You can exhale, shifting your weight forward a little bit, just kind of tapping right into that edge of your pose. You can inhale to pull back, place your hands, set yourself up well so your chest is aligning above the right leg, and then exhale, bow into a forward bend, tipping the pelvis forward. So let's just do two more sets on our own, that kind of lunging and then that runner stretch. Just visualizing your pelvis moving here, and also your skull. And after your next forward bend, you can come up and transition to the right knee kneeling and the left foot stepping down. And then bring your torso up. And we'll just first do the kind of the longer holds on those two poses. Elbows together first to open the chest. Take your weight forward enough that you're feeling the right front thigh, having that opportunity to yawn open, and then the arms go up. Fully extending those arms. You might even feel your arms squeezing the sides of your head. That's a good sign. And the eyes are restful. The gaze shifts up because the skull is angled back. Tailbone angled forward. Wonderful. Inhale to pull up and out of it. And now you'll set up that runner stretch. Rest on your left heel. Point your chest at your left leg. Evenly place the blocks to either side of the leg. Take a few moments looking forward, finding that forward pouring action of the pelvis. And then exhale, bow toward the leg. And you'll help yourself come up on an in-breath. Go ahead and find your child's pose, one single curve to the spine. Place the forehead on something, whether it's your mat, your hands, your fists. And then as you're ready to, you're going to find your way to your standing mountain pose. Go. All right. So joining the legs and feet, you can always separate feet up to hip distance if you need that. Taking a moment to connect with the floor or through the feet, and just sensing your neutral pelvis here. Your skull right above the pelvis. Drop your shoulders, firm your legs. Feel the evenness of the soles of your feet, connecting with the floor. The complementing flesh of your front thighs moving back in opposition to the flesh of the buttocks moving forward. The compactness that creates the steadiness. And we'll come again into a couple postures, pairing them together. You can open your eyes. And we'll start with crescent pose. You can separate your feet, which gives us more of a chance to keep our thigh flesh in good alignment. We want the inner thighs rolling back in back bends. So we're going to be in crescent pose, and then we're going to complement that with Ardha Uttanasana. So to prepare for that, just have your blocks kind of tall and available right in front of you. And then when you're ready, you'll sweep the arms up and press the hands together, Urdhva Namaskarasana again. And start to find that scooping action of your pelvis tipping back, and as a result, the tailbone moving forward into the body. Try to roll your inner thighs back. Take your hands back, your skull back. And your goal here is not how far back you can go, it's how even you can create the action of the pelvis versus the skull. And that's going to bring you the most, what's the word? We want repose in our poses. We don't want to be waiting them out. We don't want to be performing athletic feats, really. It's really about balance. And then inhale, start to shift the pelvis into the pouring action. You can separate the hands, parallel, extending yourself into Ardha Uttanasana. And then propping the hands just beneath the shoulder line. Pouring action with the pelvis, a nice long lumbar, probably concave or flat, not rounded. Chest is forward. Let your head go. Okay, so now we're going to do those on our own, self-guided again. Take your hands to your hips. Inhale, come up. We won't hold as long. So I just want you to really kind of fluidly move through these two poses. As you're ready, you can raise the arms, press the hands together. Exhale to extend into very evenly balanced back bend. And then inhale to come out of it. Separate the hands. Come into Ardha Uttanasana. So let's do it twice more on our own. Coming back through the neutral pelvic tilt. Make sure to use your stomach muscles to come up from Ardha Uttanasana. And we'll do it one last time here. And then when you do come up, this next time, join your feet again, And return to neutral pelvic tilt, return to mountain pose. And just observe anything you notice in the form of energy, breath, sensation, presence of mind, steadiness. There's so many things you can notice. Right, moving right along. You're going to come into another set, and you can put your blocks to the right end of the mat. We're going to pair warrior 1, warrior 3, which is a perfect back bend, forward bend pairing. So feel free to jump out if that is your favorite option. Otherwise, you can step out. But you're going to take your nice wide stance, bringing your hands onto your hips. And then you'll pivot the right toes out, the left toes in, and align your hips. So already here we have to engage the posterior pelvic tilt to adjust the torso into alignment. If you don't, for most of us, we have an angled torso. Then you're going to take your arms overhead, Urdhva Namaskara, so pressurize your hands together, try to fully extend the elbows. Inhale strongly here, exhale, taking the right knee above the right ankle without losing the vertical torso. Take your gaze up, and as the tailbone moves forward, the skull can move back. And the tailbone only moves forward because of that scooping action, that posterior pelvic tilt. Try not to disturb any of this, but try to pivot off of your left heel. And now separate the hands, start to pour the pelvis forward, align yourself over that right leg. Step in with the left toes, and on an exhale, finding Virabhadrasana 3. Now see if you can make your way back to Virabhadrasana 1, back to posterior pelvic tilt, back to sealing the hands together and pressing them together. And then inhale, you can pivot to a nice wide position. And jump or step your feet together. Good work. Dropping into mountain pose. So notice the wise actions are more spontaneous as we revisit this pose. That good old cellular memory. And just observe the breath. If your breath is ragged at all, make sure to stay long enough for the breath to become smooth. So you notice that the blocks are there. You may or may not have used them for warrior 3. So if you don't need them, you don't have to transfer them to the left. But of course, if you need to bring your hands down in that freestanding single leg warrior 3, you can by all means use the blocks. And then as you're ready, you'll jump or step your way out. And you can take your hips in your hands. You're going to pivot your feet to square the hips to the left end of the mat, already tilting the pelvis back here. Raise the arms, press the hands together, squeezing those upper arms towards the sides of your head. Take the skull back, the tailbone forward. Inhale strongly here, exhale, taking the left knee above the left ankle. And then see if you can come off the right heel, putting the right heel behind the toes. On an in-breath, separate your hands, start to tip the pelvis forward, lengthening over the left thigh. Stepping in with the right toes. And on an exhale, extending the leg. And then finding your way back to Virabhadrasana 1, finding your way back to posterior pelvic tilt. Skull moves back, chest lifts and spreads. Inhale and open wide. And jumping or stepping in. Nice work. Finding yourself in mountain pose. Okay, so another pairing we're going to do is pigeon pose. So this is a floor pose, but before we get into it, I want to talk about modifications. And it's not a pairing of two poses. This pose it's a complete pose. It has, the beginning is a back bend, and then it comes into a forward bend. So I want to talk about modified position now. For some of us that have knee issues or other things going on, I call this a soft pigeon. So a full pigeon, you'd have one leg extended straight back behind you. For a soft pigeon, you can have both knees bent, and we're going to start with both feet over to the right side. You're going to just kind of bring your hands in front of that left shin, and that's going to be where you start. For those of us that are coming into full position, you can extend the right leg back behind you. And for most of us, we need propping. So we do tend to kind of fall onto the bent knee side. So you want to definitely prop the left hip side so that your hips are level. We don't want to have asymmetrical hips in this pose. We want level hips. You might also need to prop, I'm going to show you from the side. You might also need to prop the front right thigh. Okay, so if you have the leg extended behind you, that just hanging there for some of us can get a little frozen. If we don't have the support, we won't extend. We'll just kind of freeze and wait for it to end. So give yourself propping negative space. So under that right thigh and underneath the left hip, okay? So if you're in the modified position, you might not notice the imbalance as much, but you can, if you feel a little bit of kind of an overload on your left hip side, you can just prop the left sitting bone, okay? And then you'll have a little bit more equanimity in the hips. So from either position, we're going to start with that back bend, which is the namesake for this pose, pigeon, because we really play with the puffed up chest. So if you're going to do the modified, your hands are just kind of tented up as close to the shoulder line as you can get, and you're working with the chest lifting, tailbone moving in, posterior pelvic tilt. So that's for all of us. So this pose has the beginning as a back bend. There's other poses that do as well. Parsvottanasana is another one, because we're imprinting the chest to keep that really sunshiny out in the forward space here feeling, so we don't concave the chest when we come forward. So now carrying this length and space across the chest, you're going to switch to your pouring action in your pelvis. And you do want head support here because it calms the nervous system, and then the hip gets that message that it can also quiet down a little bit, less reactive. So you might stack your hands, you might use a block, doesn't matter. Consider the neck alignment when you do place the head. We don't want to have a big crease across the neck. We want more of a smooth back of the neck. You can visualize the pelvis here, which takes that forward tilt, takes the tailbone up, and of course the skull down. So they work in a relationship like a seesaw. It's a nice image to use for this relationship. Some people really don't like this pose. Other people crave this pose. And I've noticed over time, it's a spectrum. You might start with a really aversion, a high level of aversion to this pose. And then I've seen it become those people's favorite poses, including myself. So just kind of embrace where you are with it. Notice how you're reacting to it. Just a few more breaths. And even if you're propping, you still need to use your own effort to bring balance In this case, more weight to the right side and pulling up out of that tendency to kind of slouch into the left side. And now to come up, we'll revisit the posterior pelvic tilt, the scooping action. You can take your hands, kind of tent them up again. Come up on an in-breath. Lift and spread your chest. It's important when we work with hips that we take care of our knees. We acknowledge knees might have rotated, and that's not the goal. So you're going to sweep the right leg forward, extend the left leg out in front of you as well. And taking just a brief pause here in Dandasana. We don't need to prop. We're not going to hold it very long. But placing your hands just right next to the hips or a little bit behind the hip line. Perching right on top of your sitting bones. Feeling a neutral pelvis. So if it's full of liquid, imagine it's flush to the top. It's not slopping out the front or the back. And do your best to squeeze the legs against the floor to take care of your knees. Squeeze your quadricep muscles. Good. Okay. And you might have different needs for the right knee side, so don't just rely on what just happened. Try to make a fresh assessment of what you need here. So you might start coming into the modified, seeing if that feels too mild. You might attempt to extend the left leg behind you. See about that. Take care of the propping of the right hip and possibly the front left side. And you might prop underneath the sitting bone of the right buttock if you're doing the modified, so you give a little bit more of a suggestion to bring weight back to the left side. And then we'll start with the back bending kind of entry point for this pose. So your hands are just tented up kind of as close to the shoulder line as you can, maybe a bit wider. Moving into that scooping action with your pelvis, lifting and spreading the chest, imprinting that chest and really stay forward as we take a forward bend. Come to the top of the in-breath and now pouring slowly forward. The pelvic tilt changes, guiding yourself into the forward bend, leading with your sternum, not letting it retract, and then attempt to place your head on something. You might need a block. You might need to elevate away from the floor to maintain that good integrity of this skull and pelvis relationship. We do stay here at least a minute to wait out the reaction in the body, the reflexive contracting. Observing your breath flow, making fine-tuning adjustments, keeping the hips evenly aligned, noticing how the weight likes to pool into the right side, trying to pour some weight back to the left side. As the skull moves down, the tailbone turns up. Think about every exhale, a chance to comb through tension that resides in your right hip, maybe your left front thigh as well. Just follow your next exhalation to the very end. And when you feel that urge to breathe in, you can use that to help bring you back up, using your hands, lifting the crown, taking the pelvis, tilting it back, lifting and spreading your chest. And then sit down more heavily on your right hip side to bring that left leg around, extending the right leg as well. And just coming back to Dandasana. Really perching on the very centers of your sitting bones. Be careful not to exploit the action of pushing the abdomen forward and hyperextending the low back. Keep your torso really even. Keep your chest lifted and spread, your pelvis very neutrally placed. Good. Okay. We're going to come into a bridge pose. And let's see. You don't need any props. So just come onto your back. And start to move your heels in. Step your feet several times on each foot to really kind of bring them as close as they're going to come. And then once you place them for that final time, just attempt to align your toes in front of your heels. Attempt to keep the amount of the width between the heels equal to the width between the sitting bones. And then stretch your arms out and your fingertips, they should probably come very close to your heels. Press your hands down, roll the outer upper arms down, lift your shoulder blades into the chest. And then start by sealing off that gap between you and the floor. So we're starting at the posterior pelvic tilt to prepare us for this back bend. The tailbone is going to move up toward the ceiling, curling up there like a letter J. On an exhale, lift your hips. Using your feet, really press into your feet to the point where your buttocks can be a little more off duty. Use your big toes, roll your inner thighs down. And as the tailbone curls toward the ceiling, feel how the skull really presses more deeply into the floor. Keep clamping the knees a little bit so they don't splay out. Another big in-breath. Exhale, walk your spine down. Restoring a neutral lumbar curve. Step your feet wide. Bring your hands onto your belly and just bring the knees from side to side. A little soft, repetitive, twisting action for the spine. You can have your head rolling in the opposite direction of the knees to complete that twist. And then we're going to come into cross bolsters, which will require either a couple blankets or a bolster and a blanket. But basically you want two soft props that can form an X shape. And we also want to have our strap today so that we can kind of feel a quieter side of the pose with less effort in the legs. If you're working with one or two blankets, you're going to roll the blanket or blankets. And if you're working with a bolster, that's going to be the bottom of your X shape. The bottom of your X shape is going to be the horizontal portion of the X shape. I guess it's a plus sign more than an X shape. And then the top will be the vertical, running with the spine. And then we're going to make a loop out of the strap that will contain your ankles. And remember, we want our ankles just slightly wider than our hips. So you'll have to probably approximate the loop and then try it on to make sure it's going to be a good spacing. And then you can sit on top of your plus sign and place your strap around your ankles. And we only want the feet slightly wider than the hips. So we don't want to overdo it because we want to feel contained. We want to kind of contain the energy, not have it going everywhere. So you're going to sit on top of your plus sign and bring yourself back so that your hip crests are really the peak of your front body. They're the highest point. You want to feel kind of a cascading of the trunk from the hips toward the floor. And then you'll put your arms in a Shavasana placement, kind of 45 degrees, arms. You're on your heels, you're doing your best to align your toes above your heels. Chin tilted in toward the chest. Use the pressure of the heels to help your pelvis tilt back, to take that scooping action to drive the tailbone up toward the ceiling. And then notice how the head grows heavier in doing that. You might close your eyes and look toward your cheeks. Keep closing the gap between the small of your back and your props. You might have to compact your front sides of the rib cage toward each other, toward midline, to help you close that gap in the back body. And see if you can just hold your attention in the really harmonious relationship between the skull and the pelvis. If you can strike that balance, I really trust everything else will take care of itself. Now just kind of soften everything and start to slide your feet out of your loop. And then you're going to slide toward your head side. Just leaving a little bit of the tailbone elevated. Extend your arms overhead. We'll take a soothing Urdhva Mukha Paschimottanasana, upward facing seated Western forward bend. So draw the legs in one at a time. You're elevated slightly in the sacrum tailbone. Let your thighs drop in toward your chest. And to keep our integrity with the forward bend, you have to really drive your tailbone now into your blanket. It's wanting to pull away from the blanket or the bolster. Drive it into the blanket, which brings you into that pouring action. And then extend your legs, keeping the tailbone anchored down, keeping your chin tilted into the chest. We'll go ahead and fold the legs in again. And as you after you lower the feet, you can keep sliding off your setup. And I want to finish with a twist. I was going to have us do half Lord of the Fishes, but I don't want to rush Shavasana. So we'll stay on our backs. We'll just come into supine twist. Clear your props out of your way. Stretch your arms to each side with your knees bent, your feet grounded. And we'll cross the right leg over the left leg. We're going to tuck our left hip kind of to the center of the mat underneath us, the right hip above. And we'll let the legs just kind of fall gently toward the floor. Using your left hand to hold the top leg, just to kind of give the legs a sense of security. Roll your head to the right. Breathing weight back to your right shoulder. And then gently transition back to center. Make sure to take a moment after you uncross your legs to just line everything up, your legs, your trunk, your skull, your shoulders, your hips. And then we'll cross the left leg over the right, spreading the arms wide, tucking the right hip under us, letting the legs fall gently to the floor, using the right hand to hold your legs there, and then rolling your head to the left. And every time you exhale, think about the left side ribs descending back toward the floor. Try not to hold yourself together here. Just kind of exhale everything into a more passive state. When you're ready, you're going to transition back to center. And once the legs are uncrossed, aligning yourself into Shavasana, final resting pose, which is a pose, even though it's a pose of zero effort, the alignment is very important. Drawing the flesh of the buttocks away from the torso, the heels extending away from the hips, the feet flopping out to the sides. The arms unfolded, resting as evenly as you can on the backs of your hands, aligning the skull evenly centered, softly closing the eyes. Surrendering all of your weight into the floor. Imagine the floor as a sponge absorbing you. Sustained presence is the marker of this pose, mastery in this pose. So just observe the mind. Naturally, it meanders, it wanders around. You can gently notice that. Maybe guide it back to the breath, guide it back to sensation. We'll take your next in-breath as if you're drawing it up from the soles of your feet through the entire interior body, all the way up to the top of your head. Smoothly, evenly, steadily. And then exhaling the breath in the same way from the head, all the way down, all of the interior body, out through the feet. Resuming your easiest breath flow. And begin to invite very simple movement from the outermost parts of your body, letting it trickle in, coming into the wrists, the elbows, the ankles, the knees. Taking your feet, sliding the soles of the feet onto the floor. Bringing your hands to your chest or your belly. And then easing over to one side. And just pause there. You might use your hands as a pillow. Taking a few moments on your side. minimizing any disturbance to the nervous system, to the physical body. You'll start to find your way to seated. Once you're seated, take a moment to sit in stillness long enough you can really get a sense for the effect of this practice on your body, on your mind, on your mood, your breath, your energy. And there's no wrong answers, just notice. Let's take a deep breath in through the nose and let it go. From the place within me that I know to be divine, honor that within each of you. Namaste. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining me today. And I hope to see you again soon. Enjoy the weekend. Stay cool.